Prepare yourselves for a battle of epic proportions between two titans. Feast upon their voices and revel in their words. This is Dueling Ogres.
Hello, Ogres, and welcome to episode 215. Thank you for joining us as always on this dated Saturday evening, Earth date August 3rd, 2021. I'm your host, Remington Hitchcock, and with me as always my co-host, Brandon Full. Say hello, Brandon.
Hello, Remington. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. We're in my apartment.
Yes, it's a little weird.
It is. We've got it all set up. You're on the couch, and wait, is there somebody sitting beside you right now?
Oh, gee, God. Yeah, hi. Hi. With us today is Terry W. Ervin II, the Viscount of Dueling Ogres. Hey, Terry.
Speaking a little weird.
Welcome to Dueling Ogres, where everything is awkward.
Yeah. So how are you doing, Terry?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Yeah, I'm all right.
I feel safe in my home,
Yeah.
even though there's wires running everywhere.
OSHA would have a field day.
Yeah, they would.
The long wires, the long XLR cables are hooking up the other mics at the house, and they're a little harder to take apart. But I've gotten so used to doing it at my house. But we're doing it at Brandon's today because it's a little more comfortable. Figured we'd give it a try. We didn't have to pack everybody into the studio like a bunch of sardines.
Which would have been miserable.
Yeah.
You haven't seen the new studio, Terry. It is a very small room.
I mean, it's a walk-in closet, really.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so can you fit four people in there? We've done it before, yes. Is it comfortable? Not particularly.
I would have had to have sit on your lap.
Yeah, and also right now it's a little bit of a mess. So.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie, I didn't feel like cleaning it up. I'd rather haul a whole bunch of gear over to Brandon's house.
Do you still have soda bottles everywhere? 2 liters all over the floor?
No, I've cleaned those up, but there is a bag of cans. I'm an adult. Leave me alone.
Yeah, seriously. So how was your drive up here, Terry? You've got a couple-hour drive to get to the Ogre studio.
Yeah, it was a good drive. It was just, kind of a straight shot, 70 and 77. So I can't complain. About 3 hours.
Not bad at all.
Nope, I just listen to audiobooks and drive and think. Work, I think, writing books and plotting and stuff like that in your head.
Right.
Do you ever do, recording your voice?
No.
You don't ever, here's an idea, dated to double date.
No, I used to walk around.
Day 2, double date.
I kept a little notebook in my pocket, and I would jot ideas down. But now I'm pretty good at remembering them, and I just jot them down on index cards on occasion when I get a chance. And I have a couple with me almost all the time.
Oh, okay.
And then I just transfer it to a file, online or,
Mm-hmm. Just file of ideas.
Yep.
What is it exactly that Terry, the author, reads or listens to? Are you listening purely for your enjoyment, or are you is it keep the creative juices flowing for you, or is it all a little mixture of any of it?
It's all over the place.
Yeah.
On the way down, I was listening to D-Day by Stephen Ambrose, which is obviously a telling of what happened during, the landings during World War II.
Right.
And he's really good author. I mean, the story's told of what happened through the eyes and experiences, everybody from up to the generals down to the privates, everybody along the line. And then you get some from the German point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So I just find that interesting. And then I'll listen to other things. I listen to some audiobooks about birds, and bird life and and how they act and evolved and things. And then I'll listen to fantasy and science fiction.
Yeah.
And some of it's just for entertainment, and some of it is just for you just kind of learn a little bit like how other authors did things,
Yeah.
how they told stories, how they paced things. You
Yeah.
can pay attention to dialogue and description.
Feeling
And-
out the arc and
Yeah, and the same deal when you read, except I can do it while I'm in a car.
right.
You can't read very well while you're in a car unless you're
The passenger.
not driving
Yeah.
correct. Someday I think we'll have those driving cars if you're brave enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I would ever try a self-driving car.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it would make me too nervous.
I mean, you're still in the seat, so at any point you can take control.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I thought
Yeah.
it was
No,
just you locked yourself in like a sci-fi movie, and it just.
that's no, because we're not there yet.
Mm.
So there's always a manual override. Oh my god, is it gonna break? But yeah,
I'm so nervous. Listeners, we have this setup it's actually a pretty good setup.
it's
but
not the jankiest setup we've ever done by any stretch.
That's true, but there is a slight level of jank, so I keep checking everything to make sure it's all hooked up correctly.
My question for you would be then, Remington,
Mhm.
if you're reading a book in your automatic driving car, how quick is your reaction going to be when it screws up?
Oh, slow as hell.
Exactly. I think Brandon's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's a good idea. In fact, they do say that you need to be paying attention still while you're in a self-driving car.
Which is probably for legal purposes.
Exactly. Because God knows that nobody's actually paying attention. Half the people you drive past in a day aren't paying attention to what they're doing anyway.
They're
Yeah.
paying attention to their phone.
Yeah.
We'd have a bunch of Remingtons driving around if we had self-driving cars,
Wait, why? What would I be doing?
reading books.
I wouldn't be reading. I'd still be listening
You
to
just
them.
admitted you'd be reading books.
No, I'm just saying you could.
Oh, you're just in this
It's just
hypothetical
not-
scenario.
Just not recommended.
Maybe you'd be podcasting.
Yeah. Hello, ogres, and welcome to the Driving Podcast.
Screech, crash. So, would you consider yourself a history buff, Terry? You said you were listening to like D-Day books.
A little bit, not tons, but I think I've mentioned this before, but I used to do Civil War reenactment.
Well, yeah.
And I like to read and listen about World War II as well.
We had a lady come in just the other day. The 90-something-year-old lady came in, and she was talking about when she was a kid, a teenager, how she had gone off to work in industry that was supporting the war, and she was talking about how y'all did what you were supposed to do
Mhm.
because the whole country was at war, and it was a whole effort by the whole country.
Well, because if that was a war, if you lost the war, your life was going to change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The whole country would be changed.
yeah. But it's interesting the way that people have changed over those past 50, 60, 65 years, right? Is that my math work out? It was 40.
Ended 45.
Yeah, I was going to say 45.
So there's 55 years plus 20.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, my math's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 70 some years.
hmm
Okay.
Mhm. 21 years actually. But
But the mentality of people it seems to have changed so much.
well, people say that, the Americans just don't have it, but I think, and they'll say young people just don't have it, that commitment or whatever. But I really think if there was a true crisis of that proportion,
Mm-hmm.
I think the youth would step up, and the middle class, everybody, the young and the old would step up to do what needs to be done. Maybe it'd be a little bit slower, but
Yeah.
I think Americans, they would galvanize to the cause and bind together.
That makes me feel good because you work with teens, right?
Yes.
Or like upper teens.
Yeah, I teach high school.
hmm So you think that they still have it? That it's not like a soy generation anymore?
I think for the most part in that situation, you'd have probably 90% buy-in.
Yeah.
You're never going to get 100%.
Oh, no.
But yeah, at my school, a lot of the students do go into the military. I work at a career tech center,
Yeah.
And a lot of them do go into the military. And some of them go in because they want to do it as a career. Some of them go in because they're patriotic. Some of them go in because the benefits, to help pay for school later on. Some of them because they don't just know what they want to do and they don't just want to sit at home.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think with World War II, one of the things that we see is that, like you said, your way of life would change and you had a visible enemy that you could look at and be like, this is 100% an evil enemy. The things they're doing are evil. Whereas a lot of the wars we've had since then have been kind of nebulous and muddied with different things.
Yeah. Well, can you remember 9/11?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Remember how the country came together?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, think about a war. That would be a prolonged 9/11.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about writing any historical fiction?
No.
No.
It was a decisive answer, Terry.
Fair enough.
Historical fiction is its own thing. You have to be very into the research. I mean, you have to it's not just like the technology of the time, but you have to get the attitudes, the language, all that stuff and that feel that would come together. I think I could probably do like the 80s, but that's not quite historical yet. But that's because I grew up in it. And that kind of research is just not something that would really interest me.
Yeah.
And I think I know the readers have certain expectations.
Yeah.
And if you do like romance in certain time periods, you have to hit the romance tropes and all that stuff, but you also have to be accurate to the time period. So if you're going to do it back in the 1920s, it's got to be accurate.
Yeah.
You're going to do it back in the 1700s, got to be accurate.
Because I imagine the people who are going to read a romance book set in the 1920s are probably familiar enough with the 1920s that they can pick out like, well, that's not true. They didn't have self-driving cars in the 1920s.
Or that's not a proper 20s colloquialism. Or
Yep. And that's tricky. You're right on.
My English teacher, that I made friends with at college, we've talked about that a lot because he has written some stuff, but he hasn't pulled the trigger on publishing anything yet. And but he reads just constantly, and that's one of the things that we were talking about, just story structure and that sort of thing. How he was reading this one particular book, I don't remember what it was, and I wouldn't throw anybody under the bus, but how he was reading it and they used just haphazardly, subliminally even, a word that just didn't fit the time frame, the feel of that story. It was, I think it was like a barbarian style story, like
Conan.
Conan style, or something real close to akin to that. And they used some verbiage that was just, 90s, 2000s verbiage. And he was like, it just threw me completely out of the story.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned it before, but I used to do the Civil War reenactment and just the minutia, just doing the reenactment, the dress and the mannerisms, and because you were acting, it was living history.
Yeah.
And I've forgotten so much about it. My wife, who, the dresses and the hoop skirts and all that, and, you would just have to have all that stuff. And so much of it, and Brandon, I know you've done some writing, so much of what you write never really makes the page.
Oh, right.
So much of it, but it's just background and just little things that are mentioned, but all those things add up. And I would hate to get them wrong in historical fiction. And when I'm writing science fiction, I study and I try and figure things out to get it all right. Historical fiction is a lot like that.
Yeah. So right now, Terry, you are working on Revived.
Yes.
Which is part of your LitRPG series.
Monsters, Maces, and Magic.
Yes, Monsters, Maces, and Magic. And you, I think the last you were 119,000 some words in. 113,000.
I'm shooting to be about 118, 119.
Okay. That's what I was getting ready to ask is, when you're writing, the story will take as long as it takes, I imagine. But do you have a word goal in mind to shoot for, especially with the LitRPGs that, you have said in the past, they're easier for you to write. You can pump them out a little bit quicker, and they're shorter than your bigger novels like the Crax War Chronicles, which is your sci-fi, or your fantasy one, the first Civilization's Legacy series with Flankhawk. Throughout all of them, do you have kind of just a rough word goal that you're looking for, or a word count, or are you first and foremost the story will tell itself, and then what I end up with, I'm moreover just keeping track of word count for myself and for the listeners?
Yeah, some of it's reader expectations.
Yeah.
I mean, the first Civilization's Legacy series is kind of like epic fantasy.
Yeah.
And so they don't want a 40,000 word story.
Right.
Okay. So part of it is the reader expectation. But when I look at a story like Date, I knew that was going to be short.
Yeah.
Normally, what happens is I think it's going to be about 12,000 words, and it turned out 16,000. I always have I look at the story, I have it outlined, I say, this is going to probably take this much. I thought that Revived would take probably, I was shooting for between 90 and 110. I thought 110 was the top, but it's probably going to come out 118, 120,000 words, which is pretty long for my lit RPG.
Yeah.
Now, lit RPG stories are a lot longer than mine, but that's just what I write.
Right.
And some of them have been short, some of them have been longer. This will be the longest one.
Yeah. Guild was, which is kind of a standalone from the main characters that we're following. A look, I would say, into other people who have been trapped in this world over time. But it's only audiobook wise, because I listened to the audiobook, so I don't know word counts or anything, but it's only a couple hours long.
Yeah.
Versus the other ones, which were 3 or 4 almost. So in some cases. So Guild is a really short one.
Guild is short, and Date is even shorter.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, and Pawn came out to be about just a little over 5 hours audiobook.
Yeah.
And it was probably almost 50,000 words.
Yeah.
So what I'm writing now is more than twice as long as Pawn.
Awesome. I'm really excited.
And it just depends on the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely, I would say, especially in this where it's in the lit RPG scheme of things, it's almost like you're every week that you're sitting down at the table and you cover kind of a story arc, or maybe we try to play weekly. I know that there are a lot of people who only play monthly or sometimes yearly, and they'll just sit down for like an 8-hour session or what have you. But covering a story arc, just a smaller story arc throughout, or an adventure really is what it is. It's just looking at this particular adventure with these people. So it makes sense for the books to kind of be in this shorter realm, because you have this story arc that you can just very quickly and succinctly almost
kind of tell.
Yeah, tell and then move on to the next.
Yep. And you guys have played Dungeons & Dragons. I have too, and I'm one of those people that plays about 4 times a year, 5 times a year, not very often, because I get together with people that I went to college with.
Right.
And so it's an excuse for us to get together, and then we just play. And we play old school first edition, okay, with
Thaco and everything. Huh?
Yeah, with some elements of second edition and other things.
Yeah,
so a little bit of homebrew stuff, but yeah.
Are you still playing the same character you've had for years now, or do you mix it up?
I have a campaign. I haven't run it in about 2 years, but the characters were started back in maybe 1982 or 1983.
Oh my gosh.
They're pretty high level.
Yeah, I would say so.
And it's really hard to write good adventures for really high level characters.
Yeah.
And to keep it interesting.
I like how in the lit RPGs, and I'll probably talk a lot about this because it's fresh in my mind. I just re-listened to the whole gamut of them. But I like how, especially with Guild, for instance, how you kind of reference and look at how Josiah's level is and how he occasionally thinks about that, but he's been in here for, I think you said over a decade almost.
18 years.
Yeah, or almost 2 decades. How he more thinks of himself as Josiah instead of his original name and place and character.
Yeah. I think maybe first what we ought to do is, for the listeners who don't know, Monsters, Maces, and Magic, the Lit RPG. It's basically these characters get sucked into the game as the characters that they rolled up. And a couple of the characters or the players were not really gamers at all. They just kind of showed up to get information for a sociology paper.
Yeah.
And so, they weren't immersed in the gaming at all. And there they are, they're stuck.
Yeah.
And so that adds a different element, but that's what the basic story is. And then, like you're talking, Josiah, 18 years before in the game time, he had been stuck in the world.
Yeah.
And they don't know that each other have, because see, Josiah, he sees player characters come in, but usually they're just being run by somebody else. They're not actually themselves.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. I was kind of curious about that. So the game world then is very much just a game world.
Correct.
So it's not that everybody has been proper sucked into this world. They're just it's almost as if I was playing World of Warcraft and I was playing my dwarven cleric Durgranok priest, and just on an RP server and just pretending to be him. But then at the end of the day, I unplug and I go do other things.
Right. And that's why when Higslaff, and he's the pawn shop owner.
Yeah.
He kind of looks at him because he's an NPC. He's from that world. So he looked at him as favored souls with the player characters. He doesn't know what they are, but he just knows that things are different with them.
That the gods look on them differently.
And sometimes he doesn't like to hang out with them because sometimes the game moderator will take over and make him do stuff that he normally wouldn't do.
Yeah.
So he's kind of, and one of the things, what I try to do with the series is make it a little bit different. Like Guild, I wrote from the perspective of Josiah.
Yes.
Although the main characters are in it. And you remember that, Brandon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then with Pawn, it's most of the story is told through Styx, his homunculus, who is following the characters around because they're on a mission for the pawn shop owner, and he's just there to make sure that it gets done, and if it doesn't get done right, to steal back the rubies or get the wand. And
now that you mention it, like, to me initially the book was more just about Higslaff's perspective, but you're right, it really did primarily take place through Styx's eyes. That's neat. I didn't even think about that.
Well, because Styx is reporting back to Higslaff.
Yeah, exactly. And really, he's at the mercy of whatever
Styx is a homunculus.
Wants him to do. So,
do you have any plans to write more books involving tertiary characters as opposed to the main group?
Yeah, I mean, it could come in. I have the whole story arc in my head figured out, because their goal is to, except for Girk or Kirby, to get back to their real world.
Right.
And he doesn't want to go back because he kind of had a crappy life and he thinks this is cool, but he's a junior high kid.
Yeah.
So they have a whole different mentality about things.
But at the same time, it's an interesting exploration. And Glenn has commented on it a few times, where in his own thoughts, how this game world is affecting Kirby at a young age for like using poison, which is a bit of a taboo, and he knows that it's Kirby knows that it's a taboo in the game, but means justify the end sort of thing. And I think you do a pretty fair job at, the older we get, the more gray we have. When you're a child, black is black and white is white. And then we don't get those splashes of gray until we get older and we understand the world more. So it's kind of interesting to see Kirby, being a young person, thrown full tilt into the world of gray, where he is a good person, but sometimes he does some pretty nasty things to make sure that the good people around him.
And he tries to not do it in front of them.
Yeah. Which comes from the game world of, especially if you're a good player character and you're playing with a group of people who, somebody may be a lawful good paladin and has this moral responsibility to bring to justice,
Mhm.
something that's evil. So you have a thief in the party who he serves his purpose, but if he does something, potentially illegal or immoral, then you kind of have to
Yeah.
step up and say something about it. Or you look the other way, and then are you really playing your character the
Mhm.
way that you would
Mhm.
be? So,
And I think what I tried to approach it is they are themselves, but they are highly influenced by their characters.
yeah.
What their alignment is, what their race is, what their character class is.
Which
And
you definitely get that sense of with, Kirby playing the goblin
mhm,
or the half goblin, and then Glenn playing the gnome.
mhm,
And in this world, the two races are at odds with each other. They have a deep seated kind of racism toward each other
mhm,
because of, hundreds of years of conflict, I would
mhm.
suppose. So yeah, continue.
And
Sorry.
it's just trying to, and I think it kind of highlights, things like bigotry and stuff, and how, you know, that's just something that Glenn, who's usually the focused character,
Yeah.
things are usually seen through his eyes. He tries to work through. He's a gnome. He hates being a gnome, but he also likes. Usually, people have a pretty good reaction to him initially,
Yeah.
and he reacts and says, it's not the same for Kirby.
Yeah.
When they first see him, their people are mistrusting of him because he's half goblin. What are goblins? They're raiders. They're, and what they go back to is it's hardcore written into the rule book, and that rule
Yeah.
book governs the rules of that world. And that's in this one, the book that I'm writing, Revive, that's kind of explored a little bit.
Yeah.
Where what's right and wrong, but how can you really change the rules in the rule book? Can they be changed from where you are in the world?
Yeah. And is that a commentary on the changes that you've seen? Because I'm sure you kind of pay attention to the D&D news a little bit. And I know that we've talked about it on the show where they've, orcs for so long were considered an evil core race. And now they've kind of pulled that back a little bit to address what is viewed as racist belief systems in the world of D&D, where like an Orcus race is not necessarily evil, just because their alignment says so, in quotes, alignment, because we don't have viewers. So.
Yeah. So, quote.
So, I mean,
that didn't really influence me.
Really?
That. No, but I'm aware of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But no, I just think it's Glenn and the other characters actually in that world with who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Stuck in another culture, I guess you could say, or another world system.
Yeah.
So Monsters, Maces, and Magic was your first foray into lit RPG, correct?
Correct.
What was the first book in the series?
Outpost.
Outpost. Did you write Glenn specifically to be kind of like your avatar into the world, learning about it as Glenn is learning about it as you as a writer are learning about it? Was that an intention at all, or was that unintentional?
It was more, Glenn was more a window for the reader to learn about it.
Okay. Had you read much lit RPGs before you started with Outpost?
A little bit. I mean, the Caverns and Creatures. You guys, that's how I learned about your show years and years and years ago.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The Critical Failures.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that would be lit RPG.
Yeah.
And so I've read some of those. And then there was some older books that were lit RPG way back in Guardians of the Flame, which were probably in the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've read, since I've started writing, I've read some lit RPGs, but a lot of the lit RPG today is based more on video games
Yeah.
than RPG, games, like tabletop games.
Yeah.
And my lit RPG is probably light. In other words, it's not stat heavy.
Yeah. Which is definitely something we've discussed before.
Mhm.
Is that there has been some commentary where true lit RPGers readers don't like necessarily that there's not as much crunch
Mhm.
in your books.
Yeah, they would want to know what the role was. They would want to know the armor class of everybody they're fighting. They would, and exactly ching ching how many experience points after each fight, and
Yeah.
and that just wasn't the story that I wanted to tell.
Right.
But that's not saying that it's not a legitimate way to tell a story. It's
Yeah.
just, and it depends on your readership. And I think that some of my readers would, the audience that I had when I was starting out, wouldn't really care for the crunchy.
Yeah. I've listened to a couple of different ones that are definitely more stat heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, a lot of them seem to take place more in a computerized venue, whether somebody be stuck in the world or the story is taking place in the world, but they're still able to pull out for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times their real life isn't 100% covered because real life is boring.
Yep.
So it does seem that the couple of different series that I have read have had a lot more focus on the stat blocks of things. And from my perspective, I it goes either way. Of course, I'm a pretty middle of the road kind of guy anyway, so I can pretty quickly tell how you're kind of trying to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
That if you establish that there's not a lot of crunch in a story, I'm cool with it. That's how it's going to be played out. And if there's a lot of crunch, then okay, I know that I'm getting ready to hear a computer voiceover going, "You have dealt 43 damage to blah blah blah."
Mm-hmm.
I can just expect that that's what I'm going to run into. So
Yeah.
Have you read books that are that crunchy,
yeah,
or listen to books that are that crunchy?
yeah. J.R. Davis has a little bit of that in his, and it takes place in a MMORPG. And then his second, I think it's his second book in that is actually a little flip flop, more like Guild was, where it's an afterlife where it was a living person has become, like, he passes away and he becomes a god in this MMORPG, or like a sub god, and he is in the game world affixed to a shrine. And this all happens pretty early in the book, so I don't feel like I'm really ruining anything. But a follower of this new god comes up to pay worship to the shrine, and his soul is now able to speak to this follower through pop-up windows and
Oh, that's
text.
cool.
Yeah. So he tries to help this guy with this problem and essentially fails because the guy is upset about his wife leaving him and ends up committing suicide right there at the shrine. He like takes some poison and just says, "F it, I'm dead." And then because he's within the area of the shrine, he is able to inhabit the body of the fella that just died and goes through that world now as this character.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, only now he's a demigod, so he has some godlike powers that he has to unlock as he goes. But that is a departure from the first book, where it was player characters, entering this world and interacting, and it's more of a multiverse thing is what he has going on from what he's told me. But yeah, I actually need to talk to him because it's been a while since I've seen it, if he's even released anything else.
Yeah, I know he wanted to be on as well.
Yeah.
I had a question for you as far as your word count goes. Back to what we were talking about. Do you have, because you've written so many books, do you know how many you have published at this point?
14.
14 published books, which is crazy to me that you're as prolific as you are. Does your publisher, do they still have an expectation as far as a word count? Or have you been published enough through Griffinwood Press, correct?
Correct.
That you can release a book and you can say, okay, this one clocked in after editing at 120,000 words, whereas this other one, this novella, clocked in at 55,000 words. Do they have an expectation for how many words you need to have, or do they trust you at this point to be like, okay, well, you're a proven success?
As long as the book sells, they'll be happy. Sometimes in publishing, you're as good as your last book.
Yeah.
But I think I have a good track record with Griffinwood Press that if something didn't, do well enough to at least pull a profit, I'd get a little bit of leeway. Because, like even with the lit RPG, each one is a little bit of an experiment. It's a little bit different, and there's drawbacks like date. It's going to be a very short audiobook, for example.
Yeah.
And audiobooks that are short like that, if you go through like Audible, it's a credit, and people like to spend a credit, and they like the longer books because you get more per credit.
More bang
that
for your
makes
buck.
sense.
And so they're not going to spend a credit. I don't know. It depends on how long it is. The Audible, and it'll also go through like Amazon and iTunes. The price is set based upon the length, and so it might be like $4 or something like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes, so that's something to look at. And the length of the book, what you can charge for a novelette or a novella, 99 cents, okay, for the ebook, but you have a less of a profit.
Yeah.
Because the way, all the, Amazon and Smashwords and Kobo and Nook, they pay differently for a 99-cent book, they pay, I think it's like 30% or 33% of it. Yeah, they pay 33% royalties on it. Whereas if it's like from 99 to $2.98 and then $2.99, they pay a 70% royalty.
Oh, okay.
So real small books, not only do you not get a lot because it's an inexpensive book, but also you get a lower percent of the revenue that Amazon or Nook would take in. And so that's a factor as well. The thing is, with shorter works, you can knock out more of them more quickly.
Yeah.
But you still have editing, you still have cover art, and all those other things that need to be covered, which is what my publisher covers.
Yeah.
So is that when your publisher covers it? And I don't know, I love this nitty gritty stuff. I find it interesting. When your publisher covers it, does that come out of like your back end of what you make on your sales? Or does the publisher just, because you have a publisher, just cover it anyway?
That's his job, the publisher's job. They just pay for the cover art, they pay for the editing, but that's why they keep their percentage too.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So they've got to sell so many books to make a profit.
Yeah, to recoup that from whatever they put into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that's why they're choosy about who they take, because you don't stay in business long if you don't make a profit. If you don't at least cut even.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting to kind of wrap your head around. It used to be you just read books, and then of course a book would go out of print.
Mm-hmm.
But now a book is forever. I mean, they always kind of were, but if it went out of print, then you couldn't get it anymore. Now you can get any book that you want, really, especially if it's been turned into a digital book or an audiobook from however many centuries ago.
Yeah, because it used to really suck. You'd go into the bookstore and it'd be like, here's book number 3 in the series. Well, where the heck is book number 1 and 2?
I ran into that. I read Vampire Masquerade series, and they were short little books, but I had like 16 of them, and then I ran into some time where I wasn't able to purchase them, and there were several more written, but I just couldn't get them anymore because they were short books. This is before audiobooks were really a thing because I'm old. And it's like watching an anime and then missing 2 episodes and not knowing what in the hell is happening.
Yeah.
Because that's where I ended up. I mean, the stories were about the different clans and stuff, and they'd kind of bounce back and forth between authors. But at that point, I had no idea what was happening. And so I stopped reading it, which is a bit of a bad thing. I was trying to think of a better word for, long told stories or just stories that are happening within a bigger world like those were, where you lose a reader because, for whatever reason. And now they just can't go back to it. Where now I could, in theory, go back and listen to the whole lot of them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But at the same time, so like that's a pro of being able to write in this digital world. But the con is there are so many more people writing, it seems like. just an infinite number of people who are trying their hand at telling a story and putting stuff out there. And it's so easy to, I mean, you run through a publisher,
Right.
but you can
Self-publish.
and go onto Amazon and just publish your own thing
Mhm.
and have it solely happening there. But it, they have Audible, they have Kindle, they have 3 or 4 different others that kind of run under the Amazon belt that they'll publish out to, if I remember correctly. And
then there's other outlets or vendors too. You can go wide and not just be with Amazon. So you can publish through Smashwords. You can do it through Nook, Kobo, and I'm sure Google Play.
Right.
I mean, they're iTunes, iBooks. They're all over the place.
So that's kind of the con, is that as an author, if you're really putting a lot of time and effort and energy into creating a world for people to enjoy, being stacked up against just a myriad of other people who are trying to get their story told as well.
It's hard to get noticed.
Yeah.
It is. And it's not because you wrote something terrible that you don't.
Yeah.
Some of it's luck, some of it's advertising, some of it's cover art, some of it's how you market yourself, how your publisher markets you. But self-publishing, it's not hard, and that can be a drawback. I think it's less than it used to be.
Yeah.
Because a lot more writers, authors take it seriously. It's not like their first draft, they slap it up there, put some kind of Microsoft Paint cover and say, well, I just want to see what happens, and now a lot of self-published authors do very well.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but you're right, there's a lot more voices out there.
Competition. Yeah.
Yep.
Do you write the Monsters, Maces, and Magic series in a sense that people can jump in at any point? Do you try to, like when you're writing Revived, which is the one you're working on now, do you write it with the idea that this may be somebody's first book?
Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. Guild would be one where you can come in on. Pawn would be one where you could come in on. Betrayal, and obviously Outpost, but Fairy probably wouldn't be a good choice to come in on, nor would Revived. It'd be okay because I kind of retell and remind some, but there's better places to start than others. When I first wrote Flankhawk, that's my first published novel. It wasn't the first one I wrote. The first one I wrote was Relic Tech, but it didn't get picked up right away. I took a year after to study how to write a book where it could be a sequel but stand alone.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
And so Bloodsword, you can just pick up Bloodsword and read it without having read Flankhawk, but you could go back and read Flankhawk and enjoy it just as much. But that took me a long time to figure out how to do, because I read other books that did the same thing. So I read it, studied, took notes. It just took me a long time to get the next one out.
Right.
What advice would you give to somebody who's trying to write a sequel that you could also jump into if it's your first book? Are there any hard and fast rules that you would follow?
If somebody's starting out right now, I really think if you're going to write a series, it's better to write fast than to do what I did and take a year to figure out how to do it.
Okay.
Now, some people are probably faster studies than me, but I do a lot of other things besides write novels.
Right.
So you could probably condense that time a lot quicker if you had less responsibilities or you did less things than I do outside of writing. But I think that there's value to being able to do that. There's less value, though, in that what Remington was talking about. Now you can go and you see a book on the shelf and you go, oh, hey, that'd be kind of neat. I'd like to go back and start it at the beginning. You can do that now. Whereas before, you used to not be able to do that.
That's true.
There was the Posleen War series. I found it at a Barnes and Noble. It was like the third book in the series. I picked it up and it was talking about these aliens shooting up. They're like outside there's a LRP team, some soldiers, and they were calling in artillery on around an abandoned Burger King to kill these aliens. I thought, well, this sounds kind of neat. It's book 3. And this was beforehand, right at where the transitioning over was.
Yeah. And you were just Well, can't get those.
Yeah, well, that's when you go I used to go hit the old used bookstores.
Yeah. Speaking of, we have a mailbox customer who there is a thriftbooks.com, I think is what it was, where you can just buy used books for, a quarter of the price that they were when they were first published. But, they've been well loved and well used, but you can buy them up, add them to your collection, sell them back, what have you.
There's the store near me. The closest bookstore is a Roundabout Books, which is a used bookstore.
Yeah.
There's not a used book, but there's a book I've been looking for forever by an author named Eve Forward. Have you ever heard her name? She's kind of just like, from what I've seen, just writes kind of trashy fantasy. Not like trashy romance fantasy, but your typical like dime store fantasy of just knights fighting dragons and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But she wrote a book, and I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before, called Villains by Necessity, which is about a world where good has risen up so much that there is almost no evil left in the world, and good is going to overtake evil.
I remember you talking about that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you do, because I don't.
So it's a really good series, but I've looked on thrift finds, and I did find a copy, but it was like $60.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it's an out-of-print book.
Yeah.
That's kind of well known as far as like out-of-print books go.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Message me the name of the author in the book, and I'll pay attention sometime, and if I see it, I'll get it.
Yeah, that'd be great if you run across it. There's 2 used bookstores where we are right now. One of them is by appointment only, the one on near where my parents live, if you know where that is.
Yeah.
And then the other one, J&M's Used Books, is a really good used bookstore.
There's 2 used bookstores near my house, and I like to go to regular bookstores, but sometimes the only thing you can only find it at a used bookstore.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of different avenues of book publishing, you have started to branch off into the comic book world?
We're looking at it.
Thinking about it?
Well, an artist contacted me about it for doing Outpost. It was actually the artist who did some of the cover art for the series, and he contacted me because, well, what happened was he did the cover art, and I just usually when an artist does the cover art, I send him a book. I sign it and say, because hey, they did the cover art, then it's pretty nice to put on your shelf or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he read them and he said, this is pretty darn good. I was like, well, yeah, I really try hard, but he reads a lot, and that made me feel pretty good. And then he read some of the other books, and then it was like, he likes comics and he likes art, and he said, what do you think about doing a comic? And so we got together on that, and really to do a comic book, and Stephen Hines could explain it to you, but getting an artist to do, because he does graphic novels, and he does Kickstarters to pay for the art and things like that.
Yeah.
If you get the artist and the author together to collaborate, it'll work out. Now, is it a guarantee that it's going to come through? We're working on it, but just like I taught myself how to write a book and how to write I had to sit down because I've read comic books in the past, but I'm not an avid comic book reader, because when I was a kid, I didn't have money. I didn't have money to go spend a quarter at the store and get the comic books. I would get them from my dad, who had them at the barber shop, or my cousin, and so I had to learn how to do it.
Well, writing a comic is a different. Before Dueling Ogres, we thought about doing web comics and actual comics.
Yeah. And
writing a comic as a writer to then hand off to an artist is an entirely different beast. Now, if they have some experience, they can probably take a novel and comicize it, or at least help somebody who is rewriting it for graphic novelization. But yeah, it's more like writing a movie script in a lot of ways than it is writing a novel.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And what I did was I went and I found some novels that were turned into graphic novels. And so that I had read before. And so I tried to see how they abridged the story, how they used art to tell the story that was told in the words.
Yeah.
because it's a different medium.
Well, and sometimes the details are important, So it's one thing to take 2 or 3 pages to explore the city that they're walking through. It's another thing when you're talking about the significance of Josiah having a boot dagger and then hiding his one of his razor blades, and then having another razor blade. Those are all significant points in that particular story,
right?
That
and you would have to show that in a sequence, but that takes up space in the comic book, and that takes art to draw each of those frames or cells. And it's something that I'm learning, and the artist is, he's fairly accomplished, but it's something that we're working together on to do. What I'm doing is we're working together. Basically what I'm doing is breaking it down, and I give him a description of each of what I see, like a rough guide of the different cells. And, I say what's happening, what the dialogue is, and give him a sketch, and then he's going to take it and he's going to actually convert it completely. He'll keep the dialogue. He'll, that's the plan as we're going to be moving forward. But it's going to take a while to do. It isn't, and part of it is, he would talk about this. I said, you have to wait till summer because I don't have time to, because I teach. And that's my primary focus. And then I'm also writing. I'm on village council. I'm on the planning commission. I'm on the fire board. I go to church and I do stuff with church. I have a family, a wife and kids, so I've only got so much time.
Yeah. And that's definitely, it's another thing on the plate or a plate to spin that can definitely take up a lot of time if not monitored. But at the same time, what an interesting labor of love or labor of just fascination or interest to try and do something that's fairly different than what you're doing right now as a writer.
Those rights for the story haven't been used. Why not try and use them and see what happens? My publisher Griffin Wood has had a couple of the books published in Spanish, and they've done a little bit of sales, but one of the difficult things is to market in a foreign language that you don't really speak.
Right.
That's a challenge, but so you try different things, and this is something, you're right. It may take off and it may do very well and it may fizz, or we may throw in the towel on it.
Right.
I'm not going to say, I think we're going to at least persevere through with the first couple of books. It's going to take more than one comic book issue by far, probably 7 or 8 to get through all of Outpost itself.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And that would definitely be kind of the way to do it. Talking about Stephen Hines earlier with Zombie Fabulous, he had 3 episodes of it. And now he's releasing that all 3 as a graphic novel, and if he hits his goals, an extra bit to it. And that does seem to be a pretty good way to do it, is just have those stories, or have Outpost broken out into several different issues, and then maybe along the line, if you mow through that and they do okay, then publish it all as a graphic novel. Yeah. Or even do a motion graphic novel. I'd be down to work on it.
That would be fun.
Those are always fun. Have you seen very many like motionized graphic novels? A lot of times there's
I shook my head no, and that doesn't really help your audience.
That doesn't quite pick up.
No, just hear it sloshing around. I get that big brain energy. It's usually relatively subtle, where it's a cell and you'll kind of move from cell to cell in the page, but there will be motion elements of motion, just an arm coming up pulling a dagger, or snowfall in the background, or something burning, or just flowing hair. It's all very just subtle, and a lot of times you can do it with a static piece of art and just use some Photoshop trickery to make something move.
The artist had also talked. We had talked about whether to animate it,
Yeah.
the story, or to do
God, animation.
yeah, and because he showed me some examples of that too, of what he could do,
Yeah.
and we kind of decided that the better venue would be a comic book.
Now, from the art piece that you have posted on your it's not a page, it's a group, right?
Yeah, it's a group on
Okay.
Facebook, Flankers.
Yeah, Flankers, your Facebook group, of the artwork that he did for Glenn. It looks like it very well lends itself to having that. I think it's just
Yeah, well, he's
Adobe animation.
actually he has two different types of art, one for the animation
Yeah.
and one for the comic book. They look a lot different.
Oh, do
But
they?
he said the animation one is set up so that you can use those programs to animate it
Yeah,
much,
that's
much
what I was
more
gonna
easily.
That's what I was gonna say is the animation Adobe. I think it's just Adobe Animation. I don't know. They rename it every 2 or 3 years anyway.
I'll show I'll show them to you sometime. You
Okay,
can see
yeah,
the
that would be
difference.
awesome because at least from a static perspective, it does look like it would lend itself relatively well to those kinds of programs. But if he has a different style,
It is a different style.
There's some pros and cons to doing it with the style that you have for the comic because sometimes there's some rigidness and it doesn't translate well. But you laughing at me,
For the
shaking
listeners,
my chest.
yeah, Remington is shimmying right
I'm
now
shimmying
to show animation.
And it was not rigid shimmying.
No, it was.
Listen, I'm a fat boy. There ain't nothing rigid about me. It's all globulous. But yeah, no, that would be interesting to see the animation art as well. Because the animation, especially using those programs, it used to be a laborious task, and it still very much is in the scheme of things, but it has been made a lot easier over the years as technology has advanced to do animation on your own without having, tables and tables of different artists drawing an arm 47 times,
Right.
for 2 seconds of movement. So, yeah, that would be interesting to at least see the art for.
Do you find yourself writing lit RPG? You said earlier, I think you said that it was easy to write or easier to write.
It's faster, I guess I should say, not because it's got its own little hitches and things that you need to pay attention to. I have pages and pages of notes that I keep for like all the taverns, all the places they visited, the distance traveled. I have little maps drawn.
Oh wow.
And so this way it's consistent throughout just like as a game moderator, when you create a world, you may not have the whole thing and then you add something on. Your players are going to remember those the barkeep, they're going to remember the tavern, they're going to remember, well, it took us about 5 days to travel here to this other town. And so I look at it like that. I want to be consistent like that. Keep the names the same. I jot down what they're wearing and stuff. And one of the funny things about the book is, and Glenn has even observed it. He said, everybody almost pretty much wears the same thing all the time. But in your D&D game, really, you guys pretty much wear the same darn thing all the time.
Yeah.
It's not like, unless the character makes it about, well, I'm going to wear a plaid shirt today and tomorrow I'm wearing stripes.
Right.
And that's one of and even the NPCs, Higslav, he kind of comments and thinks, I'm always wearing this hat. I've worn it since he wears like a little short top hat. He's worn it since he was 12. It's just the way it is.
Yep. With the steampunk style glasses,
Yep.
the jeweler's loop built into it with some magic.
And what happened was the game module that they're in, that the game moderator used, that's what was written. That's how he was created. And so that's how he is.
Something I struggle with whenever I'm writing for D&D is making an NPC memorable. Like just random NPC that they meet, like you said, a bartender or somebody at a shopkeep. What do you do? Do you have any tips for making an NPC memorable, like in your books?
Oh, in books or in gaming?
Either one.
Okay. Really, it's how they relate to the characters. how the characters respond to them and what they do. If they do something that's important to the plot, they're going to be more memorable than they're just a throwaway innkeeper who just gave them the key to a room.
True.
You know, that character may have a name, maybe not, and then because you can't make everybody memorable.
Mm-hmm.
But when I put that name in there and that person, there's a little section that I write that character's name down, where they're at, and just how they were dressed, any mannerisms or anything about them. Just a short thing. So if I ever come back to it, there you go.
So you have pretty much, how much of the story would you say you have laid out? Like the overarching monsters, maces, and magic?
I know whether they're going to get back or not.
Really?
Yes.
Do you know the means of how they are or are not going to get back, or do you just know in your head whether or not
I have
they
a
will?
pretty good idea.
Okay.
It's just like I'm not going to, it's how they get there, and things might change along the way because I can think of something better.
Yeah.
But I've got the arc already figured out. Just like with the Crax War Chronicles, I've got the last section words written. They're written and they're sitting in a file.
Oh, wow.
So I know where it's going. I'm just like that. Maybe it'll change. I doubt it. Maybe, so the Monsters, Maces, and Magic book will end. It will end either with them succeeding and getting back home, or failing. And what that failure will entail, the reader would discover.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the Crax War Chronicles a little bit there. You're also working on the newest book in that series, right? Or you were working on it?
Yeah, that's a science fiction action adventure set in the future. And the relic, where the word relic comes from, is the main character. He uses basically 1990s technology where man is advanced to interstellar space travel.
Okay.
Just for the listeners who may not.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We've done this so many times and we have all your books that it's easy to just forget that we have people who may be tuning in for the first time.
Yeah, running around space with a shotgun and a bayonet.
So what's the main character's name in that series?
Krakisa.
It's hard to say.
Yep. And narrators
hate you?
That. Well, there's actually, it's not so much always names, but there's just certain phrases that are difficult to say, and you would know that.
Mm.
There's just certain words you put together and they're tricky. And I sort of pay attention to that, but I'm a writer, and in the end, they're a narrator. That's their job.
And I will tell you from that perspective, I've noticed in a lot of you have a lot of K sounds.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of K and kind of guttural and hard sounds that are difficult to put to mic because you get the plosives and you get the sound, and that it can be a little jarring for a listener. But whether you realize it or not, it's something that I have noticed that as somebody who listens and then thinks about narration and stuff, is it's a thing.
Well, Jonathan Waters, who does a lot of my books, he's really good, and I think he's good. He does feminine voices pretty well for and there's distinctive. He's got a few of them. He doesn't have like thousands of them, but now if I can even say the name Chihuahua Gerganomowski, remember that is he's got a claim now, because I don't remember how many letters the name is, but he has got that as a repeated name. I mean, he's got clout among other narrators. Yeah. Well, actually, it came from an NPC from playing Dungeons and Dragons over the year.
Yeah.
And I asked my friend that we gamed with if I could use that NPC.
Yeah.
And so what I did was, he's the one who could say the name, because we just called him Chai.
Right. Yeah.
And so Jeff had recorded the name, and I just sent him the recording so he would have it, because I don't know, Brandon, you've probably got the book. You could look it up and show Remington and see if he has ever had to narrate it, if he could pull that one off.
Right. What was that one from?
Pond.
That was the mage?
Yeah.
The old
nasty,
mage?
Yeah, he was not a nice man.
Okay, yeah.
And in playing the game, he was not a nice man. That was pretty much the NPC, and you dealt with him if you wanted to.
If you dared. Yeah. Yeah, he was awful salty.
And
I-
he's probably not lawful good.
No. That was pretty apparent. What I'm curious to see is if he'll come back around, or if he was just kind of a notation in the footnote of this overall world.
I mean, he'll be around again, but I don't think he'll ever be a focused character.
Yeah. It would at least be interesting to see him have, not like you said, not be a focused character, but have more of him in there, more than just, allowing somebody to continue living.
Well, you're cocky when you think that lich, yeah, let me get established out there, then it won't be a problem. He's got a bit of an ego, but he's also got some stuff to back it up.
Yeah, for sure. Although, I mean, Higgslav caught him off guard, which I thought was definitely cool.
Did you think it? You read it too, Brendan. Did you think it balanced out well? How the player characters dealt with them, whereas how the NPCs interacted with each other?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely like that little exchange for sure.
Yeah.
In Pawn.
But Higgslav I was thinking about him as a pawn shop owner. How would he approach it? And what would he do? I mean, he's been around a while and he's dealt with difficult people.
Yeah.
So he tried to get an edge and he thought he had an edge and it didn't work out. But,
Yeah, it was enough to leave I would think a lasting impression with Shy. Just be like, yeah, he's got a little bit of spark. No. I don't particularly like spark, but he's got it.
Let's see how I can use it in the future.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so Terry, I have some listener questions for you.
Sure.
A couple of them. This first one is actually from my daughter, who says, have you ever had to change writing styles? Now, I assume she means between different genres, so your writing style in fantasy versus your writing style in sci-fi. Is that difficult to do, and do you find that you change your writing style depending on what genre you're writing?
Yeah, you consider your audience, and sometimes that's word choice. Sometimes it's just the structure of the story or the style, the expectations. So, yeah, and if you're writing for a short story and you're packing it together and it's kind of a horror story, I've never really written novel length horror or suspense, but it's just you use different descriptors, different pacing than you would with epic fantasy. Describing a combat in horror is probably going to be a little bit different, the lead up to it, whereas in epic fantasy it's more direct. Does that make sense?
Yeah, horror would be a little more suspenseful, so you'll want to put in, say, a little bit more detail or take a longer trip to get to a certain event happening. Yeah.
You think that was what the question was?
Yeah, absolutely.
Addressing?
Okay, Terry, this question is from a listener named Ryan Brown, who I told him I'd shout out his podcast, which is called Nerd Life. So you can check out that podcast. And he says, what? What are you laughing about?
I was just giggling at it was some sleight of hand that.
Yeah, some smooth and slipping it in there.
Hey, just check that out if you want to. Just get on over there. Just give it a listen.
He asks, the difficulty in making money off of a creative endeavor. Like, do you ever fear that you may be subconsciously subverting your message or authenticity when you monetize your art?
Me personally, no, but I don't make a living at it either. So for me, I write the stories that I would like to see on the shelf if I hadn't written them. So I write quality stories I believe that I think will sell as well, but I don't subvert it or change it so that I think that, well, this will sell. I'll make this controversial. I'll get, news about this and people will either buy it or hate it, but I'll make money.
Yeah.
I'm not of that attitude. I like to make money from my writing. If I made absolutely zero, I don't know if I would do it. I would find something else to do at the time.
Right.
But
it's pulling in enough to be worth it.
Yeah. I mean, like last year I made enough to put the roof on my house.
Oh,
okay.
wow.
The back part. Okay. or we'll go on vacation to Florida with my family.
Yeah.
And then I can tell my daughters, we go out to eat at a restaurant. I say, you know how many books I had to sell for this meal?
Oh, I'm sure they love it when you do that.
But the thing is, you'll see that a lot of my books they're not super, I'm not burning down the house selling any of them. But when you have, like, I have 14 books, you don't have to sell 100 of any one every day. You sell a few. If you sell a couple books a day across audiobooks, across all the different platforms that they sell on, you sell some a day, that adds up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's harder with 1 or 2 books than it is with 14.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think part of your success has been your consistency?
Inconsistency and
Your consistency in releasing books?
At least continuing to put out
yes.
content.
Some will tell you that, and I believe that there's merit to this. The best advertisement for a previous book is the next one you publish.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And that's especially true for a series, but it's also true for other books that you've written. Because you usually, for me, and I think with a lot of authors, you release, it's got a big rise and then it drops off.
Right. Yeah.
And then it's got a low sales rate. But when you, especially like a 3rd book in a series or 4th book, a lot of people will go back to the 1st book
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a sell through. And so that kind of makes a difference.
And then the more books you put out, the bigger your name gets to be on the front too.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of helps as well. Because when you have more people who know who the author of the book is, now they can say, oh, I was reading this book by Terry Ervin, instead of, oh, I was reading Outpost,
Mm-hmm.
a
That can
book
make a
about,
difference.
Mm-hmm. So now the name becomes the important part of the brand versus whatever series you're writing about at the time.
Yeah, but 99.999% of the reading world does not know who Terry W. Ervin II is. But it does make it easier with somebody who has read and word of mouth. You're right, they won't talk about the title, they'll talk about the author.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, which I don't know how true this is in this new generation of people who are, reading on their tablets and whatnot, or listening to them, because I know from my perspective, when I'm listening to a book, I care a lot less about the cover art than when I picked up a book from the bookstore. I'll look at it and I'll appreciate it, but it's not the same eye catcher that it would be in a bookstore for me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a disconnect.
Do you, when it's available, click on the sample audio?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the cover and the back of the book cover.
Yeah. But
the description.
Yeah. It used to be that as an author got more popular, his or her name would get bigger on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't necessarily have to be the case anymore if I were to take the assumption that a lot more people were like me in regard to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Where nice piece of cover art comes out. Oh, it's an Elizabeth Hamilton. Oh, okay, I know her writing. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's part of this series, or it's a new series. Oh, I want to get into that, versus, listening to a snippet from the audiobook where that doesn't tell me how many books Terry Ervin has written. It just says, this is a neat part of the story that is something that will hopefully pull me in enough to purchase the book. So,
yeah. Well, one of the things you might notice is an author whose name is at the top of the book instead of the title.
Yeah.
That's, where you're saying, I'm looking for a Stephen King book.
Yeah.
His name is at the top because his name is what's going to sell it.
Right.
Because a name is marketing.
Yeah.
A title
100%.
A title is marketing.
Which is why you're Viscount.
That's right.
Ryan Brown also asks, is it easier to wait for inspiration or just power through even when you don't feel like it?
If I waited for inspiration, sometimes I don't think things would get done for me. So I just write knowing that the first draft is not going to be the final copy anyways. And so I'll when I have the time to write, I'll sit down and I'll write. It's harder to get through, but I'll get through it. I'm not as productive, but I know that it's going to be fixed. Now, that's me. There is not, and I know I've mentioned this before, there's not any one correct way to write a novel or a
Right.
short story. And so that's why I say what works for me. Because there are some writers who, unless they're inspired, they will say, you know, their muse is talking to them, or however they convey that, they won't be successful at all in their writing unless they're struck by that. And sometimes then they will sit down and they will write, you know, 5,000 words in an hour and a half or 2 hours or 3 hours, you know. And so whatever strikes, whatever style the writer is.
Yeah.
That's something that I've run across whenever I've tried to write, is I get stuck on one thing and then my brain just shuts off and I'm like, well, I don't know where to go from here. So instead of pushing through, but I also have a terrible work ethic, so could be part of it too.
Do you have your novel plotted out or outlined, or are you kind of the seat of the pants writer?
I know generally where things are going to go, but I don't have it plotted from scene to scene yet.
Okay. Some writers, what they do when they get to your spot is they will go and write another scene that they know is coming up, and then they'll come back. They'll just jot down such and such has to happen. Then they skip over that part and pick up from there, and then come back to the such and such has to happen. They'll put asterisks and then a phrase or two, you know, what has to finish up in the scene, and then they'll go on to the next part.
It's a good idea.
So that works for some people. I don't do it, but I know other authors do.
Yeah, it's there are people who have this ability to have a non-linear workflow, is what I would call it. And that would probably, as far as you getting back to writing whatever you were wanting to write, maybe worth exploring, is doing that. That's basically what Terry is talking about, is a non-linear workflow. I'm very linear. I have to go through the whole thing beat by beat by beat by beat by beat, and that's how I have written stuff in the past. And if I have a writer's block, a lot of times I'll just sit it down for a few days and then come back and reread through everything that I have, and that'll be my kicker. That'll be my inspiration on, oh, okay, now I know what I want to happen coming up next.
I actually took some advice that you had talked about, I think the second time we interviewed you, as far as backing everything up, because I had what I was writing on my laptop and my laptop died.
Mm-hmm.
All my information was on my hard drive, and that hard drive is just no good. However, I'd emailed it to myself. I'd saved it on a secondary hard drive. I put it on a flash drive, so I had it in 3 separate places.
Yay.
So I lost maybe a paragraph or 2. But yeah, so I took that to heart, because I remember, did you say you'd lost something in a flood at one point? Or am I just totally making that up?
I just said if something was lost, because I won't lose anything. I mean, I keep a copy of a flash drive at work of my work. So in case my house floods and floats away, my work is 20 miles away. You know, because it's a lot, years and years and years of work, you know, that's all on all that. Although the other stuff has been published, my publisher has copies and stuff too of the final version.
But they don't have all of the notes about the world.
No, they don't have all that stuff. You're correct. And the other thing you might do, Brandon, is some authors, and I can't do this either, is they will be writing 2 novels or 2 stories at the same time. And when they get stalled on one, they pick up on the other.
That's a good idea too. See, because of what I'm working on now, and I mean, I hate to make this about me because we're interviewing an actual author.
How dare you, sir?
This is like Dueling Ogres, which you guys are the stars of the show.
Yeah, that's true. I'm working on a sci-fi book, but I'd kind of like to do fantasy at some point too. I think fantasy would be fun. However, in coming up with my ideas for what my sci-fi story is versus my fantasy idea is, they are very similar in that the main character is just like a schlubby outsider. So,
but you know, different settings, can make a huge difference. You know, different character name, some different traits, but still the same plot line. I mean, there is no new novel out there. Somebody's already written about the schlubby character.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true.
but it's your take on it. Write a lit RPG book.
Lit RPG
Fantasy,
would be fun to do.
You could do that, and that'd be different than your sci-fi, unless, lit RPG can be fantasy, they can be sci-fi. There's horror lit RPGs. Ray Johnson, he wrote a horror lit RPG. So that could be something you could take a look at also. So you have two things juggling, and you get stuck, you hit the other one. I don't know if you want to get 12. I'm stuck again. I guess I'll go back
Time to start another one.
Yeah, because there are people who never finish a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because, both characters are similar in their own right, they can be at different places in each story. Mm-hmm. And that can prompt a cool retelling of where the other character is further or behind in the story.
Yeah.
And then you can come back and just hit those beats.
Or they make different life choices. They start off the same. And boy, that Venn diagram, not Venn diagram, well, the Venn diagram where they have similarities will change as the dichotomous key where they make a choice different.
Yeah.
And so they get further and further apart.
That's good advice. You should be a writer.
Maybe I should teach writing or English. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and my final community question comes from Dave Musgrave, who is on a podcast called We're Probably Not Okay, which is also a podcast that I am on, so you can check that out.
I think I've listened to one or two.
It's like a mental health podcast.
Yes, I listened to one of them.
Yeah. He says, what is your schedule like when you are writing? Do you find it hard to keep pushing yourself? How do you stay motivated?
What is my schedule like? I fit it in when I can. But if you don't set time aside, it's never going to get done because something else will always fill that space. If you've ever talked to somebody who's retired, sometimes they will tell you, I don't know how I got everything done because they're always busy. I think for many people, that vacuum just doesn't exist. Something else fills it. So if you don't, writing doesn't have to be the top priority, but it has to be a priority, at least for me. Otherwise, it would never get finished.
Do you have like a certain time of day that you set aside, like a chunk to work on it? Or do you just think, okay, today I'm going to try to write for an hour and whenever I can, I will?
I look at it. My papers are graded. I'm ahead on this. I don't have anything else burning to do. I'm going to sit down and write.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll think, I'll get up Saturday morning early and I know I'm going to write. I just fit it in when I can. You just have to kind of do that. What was the second part of the question? Because he had two parts.
Yeah. Second part of the question was, do you find it hard to keep pushing yourself? How do you stay motivated?
I'm a pretty motivated person because I do so many things. My wife says I get grumpy if I'm bored. So I keep busy. And so I'm always doing something. So, it's not like I'm working 100% of the time. I goof around on the computer, or I'll piddle and do this kind of stuff. I decided I wanted to grow glass gem corn. I did it last year and then I replanted. I heard it on NPR when they were talking about it. It's like a Native American corn. It looks all different color.
Right, yeah.
It's like a popcorn, but it's smaller ears and it's like blue and red and kind of purplish and yellow and brown. Yeah. And so I thought I'd want to, so I just do little stuff like that too. So I do weird things. I've got turtles that I have in the basement.
I was going to ask how the turtles were doing.
They're fine. They're living it up because it's summer, but they're doing fine. They get beetles and stuff like that and things they don't get during the winter. And some of them are hibernating during the winter.
Yeah.
But yeah. So they're cool.
Well, I think that sums up all of our questions for you, Terry. Thank you very much for coming down. We always enjoy your visit. Of course, you have a nice list of places now that COVID is starting to simmer down and you have some things that you're getting ready to do.
Yes, that is an accurate statement.
Nice work, Graham.
Well, first, thank you for having me down here. I enjoy being on your podcast, talking to you guys, and I hope your audience kind of enjoys it too. We get like 3.
Well, how many times have I pissed on our audience in the past few episodes anyway?
Seriously.
You can message me, well, Terry, we got 3 downloads.
I think every time I do it, Brandon is like, oh, God, Ram, why do you hate everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've got a couple things. Well, this is probably the first thing that I've done, because face to face has been kind of on the kibosh, and a lot of the small cons that I was looking at doing, they all said we can't do it.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, and that's perfectly fine. It's kind of like what we've been through.
Yeah.
But I do have two things coming up. I've got around here the Classic Plastics Pop Culture Vendor Show, which is going to be September 25th from 10 to 4 at the Grand Central Mall in Vienna, West Virginia. And I think I'm going to be near the Books A Million. So I'm going to catch their customers before they go in and buy a book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, where it's laid out. Have you been to that mall before?
No, I just looked it up on a map.
Yeah, the Books A Million is like right where you'll be too. So it's perfect.
That sounds cool. I'm looking forward to it. I've done a lot of signings and events and things around this area. I've been in Parkersburg and I've been in Marietta.
Yeah.
So, and a lot, it's really kind of neat because I get to see people that I see once or twice a year.
Yeah.
I've done the Pop Con and things like that. So I really like coming out here. I like the people out here. And then this is on September 11th, which is a little bit before, but it's more around the area where I'm from.
Yeah.
The Art Affair on the Square, and that's again September 11th, 10 till 5 p.m., and that's in Urbana, Ohio. I'll be in the literary tent that's sponsored by the Champaign County Library.
Oh,
I'll
cool.
be there with 6 other authors, maybe a few more, maybe a few less. I don't really know. I find out when I show up. They're usually pretty cool people, though, and we get a big variety of genres.
Yeah. So are you excited to be able to get back out and do a couple of events again?
Yeah, I like to see people. I like to talk to people. And when I go to events, it's not all about selling books. I mean, that's kind of neat, but I like to talk to people about, science fiction shows. You've been to cons before. It's not all about, me. I like to just talk to people.
Yeah.
We'll talk about cosplay. We'll talk about comic books. We'll talk about movies. You name it, and I just like to chat with people.
Yeah, it's just like the that one time where we went and did the show from the show.
Yeah,
it was a show within a show. It was a showception.
Showception.
Hey, it was tough, but I was going to muddle through. I think some of the most interesting bits were having people from the floor just come on and talk about, their outfit or what have you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, we didn't get a ton of people, but because there's an awkwardness when a mic is put into your face or a video camera is on, and you kind of lock up, and unless you're used to doing it. So having that interaction though, and just getting to talk to somebody who just wants to talk about how cool their shit is. Yep. Or how cool they think their shit is, is awesome.
People are probably worried about, what if I say something stupid? Then it's out there forever.
Yeah. Don't worry, nobody listens to this podcast anyway. I had to get the self-deprecation back in.
Plus, you should just tell them, hey, if it turns out, I'll edit it out.
Yeah.
For a price.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for coming out, Terry. We always appreciate your visit. We appreciate that you take 3 hours to come down and just bullshit with us.
Yeah.
Well, I really have fun. I like it.
Yeah.
You guys are pretty cool.
Thanks.
Pretty
man.
cool.
Just okay. If you have any questions or comments, or you'd like to hear yourself on air, you can call us at 978 DU-OGRES. That's 978-386-4737. Bring in those little ear biscuits. I want to hear those things. Oh, can I say that? I can't say that, can I? Is that owned by Rhett and Link? We can't say ear biscuits.
Ear biscuits?
Yeah, I think that's what
I've never heard of ear biscuits.
I think that's what their podcast is called.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nah, say it. Whatever.
Yeah, whatever. What are they going to do? Sue us?
Yeah. If Rhett and Link are upset with us, then
if they're listening to our podcast, then we're doing better than I thought. You can also reach us on Twitter at Dueling Ogres, email us at duelingogres@gmail.com, or leave a comment on the Facebook page like these nice people. Brennan?
Our first comment was from Mumphrey or Larry, who says, ooh,
or Nega-Larry.
Nega-Larry. I don't think he likes that name, so I'm going to phase it out.
Okay.
I'm just going to go with Mumphrey.
All right, I guess we're going to phase out Nega-Larry.
Yeah, he's going to be Mumphrey or Larry now.
Okay.
Ooh, Christopher Judge sounds interesting. Only saw his work as Teal'c on SG TV series, but he nailed it. Hope he can make that role his own coming up. Also, I'm looking for cell phone recommendations, and LG has left the phone business brand in full, so I doubt I'll go with their stylo, but suggestions welcome. Also, a laptop. I don't game on one. It would be for browsing and writing and editing, and no editing. Hit me up, Ogre Fam. So, as far as cell phones go, what would you recommend, Remington? I know you like Samsung.
Yeah, I'm a Samsung guy. They've very rarely ever let me down.
Samsung's good. They're a little pricey.
Yeah, I would hazard away from the cheaper ones, honestly. Like the second, third tier, A5s or whatever, that I would just either get a plan or spend the money to buy, any $100 phone, or yeah.
An $800 phone.
Mhm.
My phone, I have an LG Stylo 6, which I recommended to him on free.
Yeah.
And that's why he said that LG's going out of the phone business, so he's not interested. But I love my phone, and my phone costs about $200.
Yeah.
Wizard in the Wardrobe, Keisha, I was recently talking to her, and she's going with a Motorola Moto something or other.
Mhm.
So maybe check into Motorola, Larry, if you're looking for like a mid-range phone. As far as laptops go, HP's always good. HP is really what I'd recommend. Do you use a laptop, Terry?
Yes.
What kind of laptop do you use? Do you know?
HP.
HP. Do you like it pretty well?
Yeah, for what I do, I don't like he was asking for. I just do a little bit of writing and web surfing and grading, things like that.
Yeah.
Google Classroom and stuff. So I don't, have any need for great video cards or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Are you using like a full-size laptop, or is it one of the mini ones?
Full size.
Full size. Do you have, I know you mentioned that you save your stuff in a lot of places. Do you use like external hard drives and flash drives and all kinds of things like that, or?
I use the hard drives and flash drives
Okay.
and emails. I email it to myself. I guess I could use Dropbox and stuff, but I just don't. Or I could use Google Drive to save it too, but I don't. I just flash drives and hard drives
Yeah.
and emails to myself.
Okay. Do you ever send, whenever you're working with your publisher, do you send like updated chapters as you're working on it, or do they just wait for the entire thing to be done?
They wait for the entire thing to be done.
Okay. So you're not like, well, here's chapter 1, here's an idea of what this book's going to be like.
I used to pitch to my publisher and say, this is what I'm going to do next. What do you think? But now he's more like, we'll talk, and he'll say, well, why don't you look at doing this and this, but, do what you want to do in the end.
Okay.
But he'll give me some guidance because he runs a publishing company. And so he kind of has a better idea of how things are going, what to do with a series and things like that.
Yeah. Is Griffinwood a pretty big publishing company, or is it?
No, it's not big, but I'd say overall it's successful. Its imprint, Adrenaline Press, probably sells more than Griffinwood does.
Okay.
But they do. It's action adventure.
Adrenaline is?
Yeah, Adrenaline. And so that's when I wrote, teamed up with David Wood to write Cavern.
Okay.
That's through Adrenaline Press.
And that's an offshoot of Griffinwood?
It's an imprint, yeah.
Okay. What is an imprint? I'm not familiar.
Basically, it's just another. When you have like a publisher, they'll have different imprints, and what the imprints are, like they'll have like all their mysteries under one or their nonfiction under another.
Okay.
So when people, it's kind of like branding.
Okay. Our other comment, Remington, was from the Viscount Terry W. Ervin II.
Imagine that.
Holy
Kinda
shit, he's
strange.
sitting right here.
Who says Brandon's effort at imitating Chris Pratt cracked me up. I don't even remember what I did for Chris Pratt. Was it Australian?
It was kind of Australian,
Yes.
British.
Yeah.
Yay Rim, an SG-1 fan. Bucky needs to watch Stargate SG-1. I think he would really enjoy Richard Dean Anderson's character, Colonel Jack O'Neill, and his humor.
Probably. That would, although I think that would probably be the only thing that Bucky would appreciate out of it, to be perfectly honest.
So that's all the comments we had for the last episode.
Thank you all so much for your comments. It's much appreciated, as always. And also, we'd like to thank all of our patrons. I don't have the list of everybody in front of me, but just know that we love you very much. We appreciate your support.
I know we have Chad,
Yes.
Bucky left, Tatiana, Ryan, Heavy No More, The Real Fat Tony,
Yep.
Stephen Hines,
Jenny James.
Ginny James. I think that's all of them.
I think you've got. I think that's it.
Nailed it.
Yeah. You're the best. around. Walking down.
If you miss somebody, just say their name twice next episode.
There you go. Make sure to check out our website at duelingogres.com for articles pertaining to some of your favorite geek news. It's been a little bit since we've written anything, but, Larry comes through every once in a while clutch with a new article about some tabletop RPGs,
Yeah.
which is always wonderful. And finally, be sure to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or find us on Podbean, iHeartRadio, Satchel. That's how old this little script is.
Satchel. Jeez.
Satchel. I don't think Satchel's around anymore.
No, you were pushing Satchel pretty hard for a while.
I tried.
Too, because you were friends with the...
Well, it wasn't even because I was friends. I just liked their app. It just did not take off. So
Yeah.
It is what it is. That's the world of technology. Sometimes it just takes a poop on you. But you can find us anywhere you can find a podcast. Anywhere. Anywhere. So until next week, Ogres, keep your clubs blunt.
And your tusk sharp.
Good night. Leave in that pregnant pause.
Oh, I will. Believe me, I will.
Oh, all right. Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
coming. Did we cover everything you wanted to cover?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm just here to be on the podcast.
Now I'm all nervous.
Oh, you thought Brandon had a bright idea and the light bulb went off. There's been a couple of them that I was like, well, I wouldn't give it an A. I'd give it a C. But I've never heard you guys do one that's like, what the hell? I mean, I've never had one of those that you guys did.
Yeah.
At least in my opinion.
So do you want to get into some community questions I've got for you, Terry?
Sure.
See, you didn't think it was going to be all about you, but we made it.
No, whatever you guys want to do, I thought, yeah. I mean, your listeners have heard a lot from me before.
I was going to write these down so I didn't have to pull out my phone, but they're just so long.
Well, it just means you just have to edit it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And then Slapnuts wanted to know how you put it in reverse.
What does that mean?
Exactly.
That was my
Exactly-
thought too.
And that's exactly where we'll leave it.
So, did you want to ask that question? Then I can say, what does that mean?
Nope, we'll just leave it in
Okay.
like that. I'll let Brandon take the editorial note on that, on whether or
All
not
right.
he wants to leave it or not. You don't want the one that says "grease it up and slide it in your nerd hole"?
No, I probably don't want that one because that too many questions about that with the school board.
You could wear it to the town meetings.
Yeah. Okay. So you thinking pitchforks and
Yeah.
torches would be
Pitchforks
good
and
around my
torches.
house?
Yeah, I hate that shirt, Rivington, but I've made it no secret that I hate that shirt.
It's such a good shirt.
It's so gross.
It's not.
It's not intent. What it means isn't gross because it's talking about listening to a podcast, but it just sounds disgusting. Grease it up.
Yeah.